We're going to look at new beginnings. So we've been looking at beginnings, origins, where we come from, but today we're going to be looking at new beginnings. I thought for convenience-wise, I was just going to keep going along that lineage and go to the next major player, who is Moses. So if you do have a Bible with you, you can open up to Exodus. We're going to be talking about Moses. But I just wanted to talk about how we've been going through Genesis, if you haven't been with us for the last little while. We have to remember that sometimes looking back into history, it can be boring sometimes. I know a lot of Christians actually who've never even really read the Old Testament because they find it dry or boring or whatnot. But for me, I really like the Old Testament. I like the history behind it. For me, there's something really inspiring about looking at what people have done before us and how that's actually shaped what we're doing today. We would be nothing without the people of the past. Everything kind of progresses throughout history, and that's where we are today. So for me, it's very important to be able to look at our past, look where we come from, look at the things we've overcome, and to push forward. And holidays are a good way to do that. We look at how people have overcome things. I mean, Easter, that's why it's there. It's to remember the things that we've overcome, or things that, say, Jesus has overcome for us. But what I've been finding recently, and I'm sure you've seen it too, is this taboo word called religion. A lot of us don't talk about religion because people who aren't religious talk about religion as a bad thing. And I know a lot of people who, and I've said this myself too, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. It's quite, we've all heard it, right? We've probably all said it too before. But there is something very important about religion. If we didn't use our religion, if we just use spirituality, it's kind of a self-absorbed way to progress through life. It's almost an egotistic way to do it, to think that you have all the answers. We have history, we have books, we have great minds who have been working throughout the entire history of the world to try to get us to know a little bit more. We should be utilizing these kind of people, these guys like Abraham, guys like Moses, who we're going to be looking at today. We shouldn't be afraid of what religion has done, because it has done some bad things. And so a lot of people don't like to look at the bad things. But what's important about looking at our history and looking at our origins is to be able to recognize the things that people have done wrong and to overcome those things. Not to be afraid of our past. Christianity has a pretty negative past. For about 1,500 years, it was the oppressing religion. It forced people to become Christians, and if you didn't, they'd kill you. And we don't like to talk about it because it is a bad thing, and lots of Christians were doing it. And it's bad, but we can't ignore it because it's true. It's part of our history. What we have to do is to be able to look back and recognize the mistakes we've made and to move forward. One of my favorite quotes, and I'm sure you've all heard it, I can't really pronounce the guy's name, George Santanian. I had to look it up because I'd heard the quote a million times, but I didn't know who said it. He's the one who said, "Those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it." And it's true, we're doomed to repeat it. If we don't look back on the mistakes we've made, we're doomed to make the mistakes again. And so that's what I love about looking back on origins, and that's why it's so important to look at these guys. So today, we're looking at Moses, and we're going to start in Exodus. And if you don't know anything about Moses, I'm not going to read all of Exodus because it's pretty long. But if you don't know about Moses, he came after Joseph. So the Hebrews, they lived in Egypt. And now their generation is it's kept going down the lineage. They've started to grow as a people. And they're slaves. They're oppressed by the Egyptians. And so what's happening now is they're starting to expand. They're getting bigger. And Pharaoh is starting to get worried now. So he's got these slaves people building for him, doing his work, and now they're getting too strong. He's afraid. So what he does is he orders that all male boys are to be killed when they're born. So Moses is one of these male boys who's born, and his mother just can't do it. She can't kill him. And so she puts him in a basket and floats him down the river. I'm sure everybody's heard this story. It's classic, and then the Pharaoh's daughter ends up getting him. And so he grows up in an Egyptian home. He is a Hebrew, and so this is where we meet Moses. So I'm going to start in chapter 2, verse 11. And I'm going to read here. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian. So I really recognize with Moses here, and I'm trying to, when I read these stories, I try to picture myself in the culture, because it's really hard to do that. We're not oppressed. We don't live in an oppressed society. To think that his people they're literally killing infant babies when they're born, like that's pretty horrific. It's easy to read it and to just gloss over it, but this is some pretty serious stuff happening and some pretty grotesque things happening. So you can see the conflict within these two peoples, why the Hebrews would hate the Egyptians. And I understand why these Hebrews here would hate Moses. I mean, could you imagine being born into a culture where one of your people was now raised as a Pharaoh? So they know he's Hebrew, and they know he's seen as special. So I get why why they're condemning him for killing the Egyptian. But what Moses is trying to do is he's just trying to fit in. I mean, who hasn't been in Moses' position where you're just trying to fit in? You're looking for a place. He obviously doesn't feel like he's at home with these Egyptians because he's not. They know he's Hebrew, and he's not really fitting in with the Hebrews because they probably think he's some kind of traitor, right? He's not one of them. So he runs away. And so when we're talking about these ideas of new beginnings, a lot of us kind of come to this conclusion. Okay, well, I'll just run away. Like that's pretty set conclusion, right? That's easy enough. I'll just start fresh, right? And who hasn't wanted to be there? For me, I had this thought a while back. I was going through a bit of a tough time, and I wasn't really feeling like I was fitting in anywhere. I was out of the military at this point. If you didn't know, I was in the military. And one thing I was thinking back on was how I really felt like I fit in with the military. I felt like it was my place. When I walk down the streets today and I go to work and I do these kind of things, honestly, I don't really feel like I fit in with the culture, with what's going on. And I can at least admit it. Some of us probably feel the same way and maybe have never even admitted that, but I really don't feel like I fit in. And one culture I felt like I fit in was the military. I felt like that was where I really felt a purpose and a reason to be. And so a few years ago, a lot of people don't know this, and even my family probably doesn't know this, but I was very set on going full-time Army. So I was this close to not being here now. I was ready to just give up. I was just done. I was like Moses, I just need to run away. I need to start fresh, something new. Moses, he starts fresh. He goes to this new place. He gets married. He starts a family. And doesn't that just sound peaceful? Like that sounds great. That sounds like a lot of us probably would want that, wouldn't we? And I wanted to do that too. I'll share the story why I didn't. I was going to go in to the Army. I was going to go and sign up. And I'd done it before, but I was going to go actually commit. And that night before I went, I had a dream. And I feel like it was God. God came to me in a dream, I feel like, right? And so in my dream, my mom's in front of me sitting on the couch, and we're talking about Leah, my daughter, and she's sleeping in the other room in my dream. And so we're talking about, I don't know if I was going to go out or something like that. And then in the mirror beside her, I saw Leah go by on a tricycle. But it wasn't Leah. It was almost like a ghost of Leah. It was really hard to explain, but I knew something was wrong. So I ran to the room where Leah was. And in her bed, I could see her, and she was struggling physically. She was starting to turn green, and she was sweating. And so I grabbed her, and in my dream, I could still remember it vividly. I'm getting emotional, right? And so I grab Leah, and I take her out into the front room, and I put her down, and I just start praying over her, and in my dream. And at this point now, she's fully green. her limbs are like elongated and really like this is like demon possession, weird stuff going on within this dream. And I remember just praying. I was saying, God, wake her up, wake her up. And then I don't know if I suddenly realized I was dreaming. I said, God, wake me up. And then instantly I woke up. And that dream really stuck with me. And what it did for me, I was really in that hard place. I was feeling left out. I was feeling like I wasn't fitting in. And I really wanted to just run away. And what this was showing to me was that, no, like I can't run away. I have responsibilities. I have things that are going on. Sometimes they're hard to get through. But what God was trying to show me is that I'm needed. I have a purpose here. I think that's what I was lacking. I was lacking a sense of purpose. And that's what that showed me, is that there is a purpose. And so as we keep going with Moses and with his idea of purpose, what a perfect time with the New Year's. New Year's, new beginnings, fresh start, looking for purpose. I decided to go online and look at the top New Year's resolutions, because everybody sets resolutions. I'm sure everybody could guess the top 5. What do you guys think number 1 is anyways? Lose weight. That's number 1. So the top 5 is lose weight. 2 is get organized. 3 is spend less, save more. 4 is enjoy life. And 5 is stay fit. Stay fit kind of seems like lose weight to me. But anyways, I couldn't believe smoking wasn't up there. One thing I always find funny at work is January starts and suddenly nobody smokes in the yard. Usually February 1st, everybody's smoking again. Another statistic, success rate of actually continuing your New Year's resolution is 8%. A whopping 8% of people actually follow through with their New Year's resolutions. I'm not really a New Year's resolutions kind of guy. I don't think I've ever really set one, but I don't know, maybe if you're not either, maybe after today you'll feel the need to set one. So let's continue with Moses. I'm going to pick it up again. So he moves, he kind of starts fresh, and now we're going to read from chapter 3, verse 2. And this is years have passed, and he's tending flock, he's become a shepherd. Chapter 3, verse 2. As he's walking along, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. This is, if you have been following the Genesis story, each patriarch that we've been looking at has this encounter with God, and each one of them says, here I am. And as Bradley has talked about, this isn't a here I am blanket statement, like, oh, hey God, here I am. No, this is like, here I am. I'm ready to do whatever it is you want me to do. I'm willing to do anything it takes. And when I look at this and I look at Moses, I'm trying to get in his head, and I feel like he probably ran away and he found happiness. He found his family, but I feel like as time has gone on, he's probably searching for God. He's probably searching for purpose again. If I was born in an oppressive culture, and years later I got out of it, I would probably think back to my people and really be thinking about them. I think in this moment, God definitely comes to Moses, but I think we should also think Moses is probably searching God in this moment too. It's kind of a joint effort, and it shows that he's obedient to God. He is searching for God. He's willing to do whatever it takes with God. And I think this is important. It's important to be seeking God, to be always mindful of that, not to just run away from these things, but our new beginnings should start with God. They shouldn't come from our own search of joy. I think that searching for happiness, you might become happy for a little bit, but the long term, it never really works. One of my favorite writers, Peter Rollins, I'm going to be paraphrasing this, but he likes this idea. He talks about how a kid wants a puppy, and it's fitting because my kid just got a puppy, but a kid really wants a puppy, and they're not going to be happy until they get this puppy, and they keep begging their parents, Mom, just get me this puppy. I need this puppy. And they keep saying no, like we're not going to get a puppy. And years keep going, and they keep saying, I'm only going to be happy if I get this puppy. And now this puppy has become something more than just a puppy. Like, this is the key to happiness. Like, to get this, if only I could get this puppy, I'll be happy. And then the kid ends up getting the puppy, and then a month later, now we need something else, right? This is kind of our nature, our human nature. We, like Moses, we want to just run away from the responsibilities, from the hard things. We want to start fresh. We're looking for happiness. But when we find happiness, what we're going to find is that it's not a long-term happiness. If we're looking for purpose, if we're looking for happiness, we'll find it short-term. But if we're looking for purpose, we might not find happiness right away, but we might find a long-term solution. And I think this is what's happened with Moses. So I'm not even going to read anymore from Moses, but what happens is he abandons this easy lifestyle, this family lifestyle, and he goes and sets his people free. They wander through the desert for 40 years. He's their leader. He's leading a people who aren't really receptive to God, I would say. They're always questioning, always wondering what's going on. They're impatient. And so for 40 years, he wanders with them in the desert. And he dies before he sees the promised land. This is almost a sad story about Moses. He's a guy who's really just, who wants to serve God. He gives up everything he's got to serve God. And in the end, he doesn't get to the promised land. So sometimes, I feel like in this moment, what we see is that some of us, we search for a destination. That happiness is a destination. But I can't even say the quote, but everybody knows happiness isn't a destination, it's a way of life. It's part of the journey, right? But I find when we're starting new beginnings and we're talking about the idea of New Year's, what we should be looking for is purpose. What we should be looking for is God. Not happiness. We shouldn't be looking for what's going to make us happy. We should be looking for purpose. We should be looking for God. And I'm going to give a few. I always hate this about sermons, and I've never been this kind of guy for a sermon. And one of our pastors in the other church, every single sermon, he had okay, this is my sermon. Now I'm going to give you 3 easy ways to walk out of here and be happy, kind of thing, right? But I've decided to do 3 easy things to get you started. And I've come up with these on my own, so you can agree with me or not. But first easy way to walk out of here and find purpose is to look at the past. To look at our collective past as an organization that you're a part of, as a Christian community full of traditions and people who have been working like you to try to figure out God. To look back on these people, not necessarily to agree with all of them, but to utilize their skill sets, their experiences, their wisdom to push us forward. That being said, also to look at our own past and to try to look at it without an ego, without a prideness. A lot of us, we don't like to look at the faults we've made and the mistakes we've made. And sometimes that's how we're going to grow, if we actually recognize the mistakes we made. Just admit that we've made these mistakes and to learn from them and to not do them again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I don't know what that implies, but anyways. Number 2, I've decided, invest in art. I think that art is a great way to start finding purpose. I'd say almost every artist is seeking purpose. That's really the goal of art. Here we push for art. We've got the open mics coming up. We always have Emerald Pig coming in and we like to support local art. And I mean, this book is littered with art. This thing is half art. It's half poetry. You look at the Psalms, Job. Half of the Old Testament is just art. King David, who is a man after God's own heart, was an artist. He was a poet. He was a musician. I think in art, it really can help us express feelings we've been feeling and help us search things that we can't really even talk about. Some things are out there that are in words and some things aren't. And we have to be able to recognize the spots that aren't really in words and more in emotion and feelings. Last time, I think I mentioned last time that pretty much every time I get up here, I quote Fight Club. And so I decided to keep going with that. And I love this little piece on art. And you won't find it in the movie, actually. You have to read the book. So you're going to get your literature in for today from Fight Club. I decided to read this part. And so in this scene, this is where the narrator first meets Tyler Durden. So in the movie, he meets him on an airplane. But on here, he's meeting him at a beach. So try to listen, try to pay attention. This is actually how they used to tell stories. They'd say it out loud and people would listen. We've really lost a lot of imagination watching TV all the time. So try to not have your TV mind. Try to actually listen and put yourself in the scene here, okay? So Tyler was pulling driftwood logs out of the surf and dragging them up the beach. In the wet sand, he'd already planted a half circle of logs so they stood a few inches apart and as tall as his eyes. There were 4 logs, and when I woke up, I watched Tyler pull a 5th log up out of the beach. Tyler dug a hole under one end of the log, then lifted the other end until the log slid into the hole and stood there at a slight angle. You wake up at the beach. You were the only person on the beach. With a stick, Tyler drew a straight line in the sand several feet away. Tyler went back to straighten the log by stamping sand around its base. I was the only person watching this. Tyler called over. Do you know what time it is? I always wear a watch. Do you know what time it is? I asked where. Right here, Tyler said, right now. It was 4:06 p.m. After a while, Tyler sat cross-legged in the shadow of the standing logs. Tyler sat for a few minutes, got up and took a swim, pulled on a t-shirt, pair of sweatpants, and started to leave. I had to ask, I had to know what Tyler was doing while I was asleep. If I could wake up in a different place at a different time, could I wake up as a different person? I asked if Tyler was an artist. Tyler shrugged and showed me how the 5 standing logs were wider at the base. Tyler showed me the line he'd drawn in the sand and how he'd used the line to gauge the shadow cast by each log. Sometimes you wake up and you have to ask where you are. What Tyler had created was the shadow of a giant hand, only now the fingers were nosfer too long and the thumb was too short. But he said how at exactly 4:30, the hand was perfect. The giant shadow hand was perfect for 1 minute, and for 1 perfect minute, Tyler sat in the palm of a perfection he'd created. You wake up and you're nowhere. 1 minute was enough, Tyler said. A person had to work hard for it, but a minute of perfection was worth the effort. A moment was the most you could ever expect from perfection. Sometimes we seek perfection. When I see this, when we seek perfection, sometimes we have to be grateful for just the moments that we get. And when I read that, I think of parables too. And we're talking about art and how art can propel us into looking for purpose. I mean, what did Jesus do? He spoke primarily in parables. Parables are another art form. It's a way to engage people. You have to be invested in a parable. You can't just accept what somebody tells you what a parable means. A parable is intended for you to listen and to interpret and to feel the story. There's no answers to parables. So my number 2 is to look into art. And the parable idea brings me to number 3, and that's to invest in people. So we say invest in art, I say invest in people. Get involved. I think get involved with the church. When we talk about parables, we're actually, in our Bible study, we're starting parables. We're actually going to start writing our own parables, using art form to connect each other into a community for God. I mean, what is church but just a place that people come together searching the same things? So if you're struggling this new year to find purpose or to find God, I'd say a good way to start is to get connected. Start talking to people. Church is a great way. You're here anyways. Look around. You're in a building full of everybody looking for the same thing, looking for God, looking for purpose in their life. Why not get together and talk about it? Get together and play some music. Let's search together. Let's do these things together. And it is hard when you look at some of these stories and you look at the guys like Moses who they're just looking to run away but God's calling them to do something more. And it's hard. I mean, we can keep reading and we can try to understand what Moses was going through, but we really can't. We have to just kind of take it as it is. But for me, I see purpose. I see joy in Moses' life, even though it sounds like a bad way to go, to wander in the desert for 40 years when you could be sitting at home drinking pina coladas with your family on the farm, right? It's tough, right? But sometimes, and he, in that moment when he said, here I am, he was willing to go through what it took. And so the question for us today is, are we willing to say, here I am? For me, I feel like my purpose is my kid. I almost got the reversal of Moses. Like, I want to go fight the Pharaoh. I want to get into the battle. I want to do something exciting. But that's not really where I'm supposed to be right now, right? So sometimes we have to look to God to see where we're supposed to be, and not about the quick joy, the quick happiness. We need to look for purpose in our life, long-term goals, look towards the future. Our history can affect how we perceive the future. And as you see, the present, history has affected our present, whether we like it or not. And so our present now affects the future. One thing that scares me is when I look back on history, you can look at all these great people doing great things. One thing that really scares me is in the future, are they going to be looking back on us and seeing those things too? Are they going to be looking back on our culture and saying, wow, they really did some amazing things? Or are they going to be looking back? Will they even be able to look back? Will they even be able to? We have to really start thinking about the future. These guys, Moses really thought about the future. He didn't care they had to wander through the desert. He didn't get to see the promised land, but he trusted God that the promised land was for his people. Are we prepared to go forward even with the thought in our mind that maybe we won't see the promised land? Maybe we won't reach joy and happiness in our lives. That maybe that's reserved for the future generations. It's not easy to accept, but it's possible, right? We don't know. What we have to do is just trust God. And like I said, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. If we journey with God, if we start anew with God, I personally believe he's going to work with us through that. And joy is going to come, whether we're sipping pina coladas on the beach or whether we're wandering the desert for 40 years. I think joy can be found. It just depends on where you're looking for it, really.